Thank you very much. Thousands of people have been resisting for over 10 years against the start of a planned mining project called Tia Maria in southern Peru, despite the official approval of the environmental impact assessment. They are fearing contamination and they are fearing changes in their social relations, which are closely connected to their agricultural practice. Since the 1990s, the number of conflicts in relation to mining projects rose in Peru. As you can see in a second here on the slide, currently the Ombuds Office counts over 100 conflicts only based on environmental concerns. And this is happening despite considerable progress has been made in environmental regulation since the 1990s. So what are their limits? What is the problem? To give you a brief contextualization, Peru is a major producer of copper, gold, and silver on a world scale. And already since colonial time, the country has been integrated as a provider of natural resources, and its economy and also its development continues to be based on the extraction and export of natural resources. In the 1990s, after years of an economic crisis, the mining sector and economy were boosted by privatization and foreign investment, and especially by high demand and high prices of commodities since the 2000s, a period which is known as the super cycle of the commodities boom. Mining is considered as the motor of economic growth, and it also supported the reduction of overall poverty. And those economic aspects, combined with the discourse of high environmental standards and the use of modern technologies, further expansion of mining also into socially and ecologically sensitive areas is widely legitimized within society. However, its negative ecological and social consequences are hidden from this discourse, and in face of a multiplication of mining projects, environmental regulation has not been apt in preventing environmental impact, in reducing the overall CO2 emissions, nor in easing social conflicts. As part of my doctoral research, so I'm interested in the development of environmental regulation in the Peruvian mining sector and its social, ecological, and economic limits. From the perspective of political ecology, I include the analysis of different actors and their interests and emphasize experiences of the local population exposed or threatened by consequences of mining projects. So on the one hand, considerable progress has been made, while environmental standards have been basically non-existent before the 1990s. The setting of limits of water and air contamination, of course, has been essential in reducing the extent of environmental impact of specific mining projects. Also important environmental institutions were established, such as the Ministry of Environment in 2012, the requirement of an environmental impact assessment before starting a mining project, or institutions overseeing the implementation of environmental rules and its sanctioning in case of breach. The role of international actors is somehow paradox in this context. The environment has been set on the international agenda, and since the 1990s, actors such as the World Bank or states such as the USA or the European Union conditioned their investments and also their trading agreements to the integration of higher environmental standards and independent environmental institutions. So while they were essential in pushing this process and this development in Peru, those actors also encouraged and financed the extension of mining projects led by economic interests and also the need to secure access to resources in times of rising global demand. And this in turn leads to both ecological and economic limits of environmental regulation. Economic limits became evident at times of economic slowdown at the end of the supercycle in 2014, when the Peruvian state, to counteract also falling investments, allowed again higher levels of contamination, limited possibilities to sanction environmental misbehavior, and reduce bureaucratic requirements of environmental assessment. And as mining naturally impacts ecological condition and contaminates, even if it is within certain limits, environmental regulation reaches ecological limits if projects are multiplied. Also, modern, greener technologies facilitate further expansion of mining projects, also into more sensitive areas, and thus also contribute to environmental degradation. Besides further limits, due to general insufficiencies in implementing and overseeing the compliance with existing rules, I want to stress also social limits, which arise from a dominant understanding of nature, which guides environmental regulation and which is often contested by local population. Within the dominant vision, nature is considered as a resource which can be exploited, commodified, and subordinated to capitalist interests, and, if needed, partly protected. However, especially for rural, sometimes indigenous communities, nature is not something out there which can be partly protected by limiting contamination. Other existing understandings of nature, understanding nature not as separate from society, but as an integral part of one another, ascribing intrinsic values to nature and a relational and collective character to it, have been marginalized in the context of developing environmental regulation. Also, apart from considerations of environmental justice and the asymmetrical distribution of ecological costs along the lines of class, race, and gender, which mining produces and reproduces, access to nature has to be understood as the basis of life for many people in Peru, as social relations, material living conditions, and the reproduction of life are directly linked to those relations to nature. And the missing integration of those different social relations to nature is not only reflected in the limited official space of local population to decide about, for example, criteria about environmental impact assessment or the soundness of a specific mining project. It is also reflected in violence directed towards people protesting in defense of those relations. And those limits are also at the base of the conflict in relation to the planned mining project Tia Maria, which I've mentioned in the beginning. The official approval of the environmental impact assessment being a central aspect of reference and also rejection. Local population resists to protect their healthy environment, their inclusive social relations, which are based on the access to fertile land and also their agricultural practice, and to secure their own imaginary of future. To conclude, environmental regulation in the mining sector is essential to limit worse effects. However, it faces various socio-ecological limits. It helps to legitimize the further expansion of mining, which in turn also leads to environmental conflicts. Impacts of mining, of course, can be tackled from various perspectives and disciplines, from natural science, considering, for example, impacts of mining on climate or agricultural productivity, to economics, social sciences, and of course also environmental psychology and humanities. So I hope we will be able to discuss about some aspects later on, and thank you very much for your attention.